The horse no one wanted was too dangerous to touch. Even trained handlers stayed back. But in the middle of the night, a girl who hasn't spoken in years walks into her stall and sits down like she belongs there. Cameras catch everything. No one can explain what happens next. Like and subscribe to continue the story and have an emotional watch. At 3:13 a.m., the barn felt like a place holding its breath. Rain tapped softly against the tin roof, steady and patient, like it had all night to wait for something to break. The wind moved through the wooden slats in slow, uneven sighs. A single bulb over the aisle flickered on, off, on again, casting thin bars of light across the floor like a warning no one had written down. Inside the house, the only glow came from an old security monitor on the kitchen counter. Claire Mercer looked up at it and forgot how to move. "Oh my God!" The words barely left her lips. Daniel, sitting at the table with a stack of instructions from the rescue feed schedules, handling warnings, emergency numbers, followed her stare. Then his hand stopped mid-page. On the screen, their daughter was in the barn. Emma sat in the straw just inside the stall threshold. Small, still, too close, and across from her in the darkest corner stood Mia. The foal no one touched. The one the vet had warned them about that very afternoon in a voice so calm it made it worse. "She's unpredictable. Nobody goes in that stall alone." Marla had said it differently, but it meant the same thing. That horse doesn't trust anything. Not hands, not voices, not light. Claire felt her chest tighten, because Emma was sitting right there. Inside the line, everyone else respected. "No," Claire whispered, already stepping toward the door. Daniel caught her wrist. "Wait. She's in there." "I know." That horse could hurt her. But Daniel didn't let go, because something on the screen had already changed. Mia had moved. Not the violent kind of movement they had seen at the rescue, when a dropped bucket sent her crashing into the stall wall, or when a halter made her panic like it was fire against her skin. This was different, and slower, her head lifted slightly out of the shadows, ears forward, body still tense but no longer exploding with fear. She was listening, and Emma tilted her head just a little. For 4 years she had not spoken, not to her parents, not to doctors, not to anyone. After the crow, Claire still saw it sometimes when she closed her eyes. The sudden drop of black wings, the sound, the chaos, the way Emma had screamed once and then never again. The doctors had called it selective mutism, trauma response, words that sounded clinical, contained, but nothing about it had felt contained. It had filled their home, their days, their silence. There was a notebook in the kitchen labeled Words. Claire had written it herself, hoping it might become something. Page after page waited for sounds that never came. Until one day, months ago, in the back seat of the car, Emma had seen a horse in a field and whispered, "Horse." Just once. Then nothing again. That single word had brought them here, and to Willow Ridge Rescue, to Mia. A foal nobody wanted, too nervous, too reactive, too broken after a storm no one fully understood. The file had said untrainable. Marla had translated it more honestly. She got scared, and no one taught her how to come back from it. Now, on the monitor, those two broken stories faced each other in the same narrow space. Emma's lips parted. The sound that came out was barely there. "Come here." Claire froze. Daniel felt it in his chest before he processed it in his mind. Emma had spoken. The words were soft, fragile, almost lost under the sound of rain. But Mia heard them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the foal took one step forward. Claire's hand tightened against the counter. Mia didn't rush, didn't bolt, didn't lash out. She moved like something inside her was arguing with every instinct she had left. Another step. Closer now. Close enough that the faint outline of her ribs showed even in the grainy green light. Close enough to see the hesitation in every inch of her body. Emma didn't move. No sudden gestures, no reaching, no excitement, just stillness. A kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. Mia lowered her head slightly. 3 feet. 2. Emma lifted her hand. Claire closed her eyes, but there was no crash, no scream, no chaos. When she opened them again, Mia was standing right in front of the child. Not striking, not pulling away, just standing there, uncertain, but present. Then, slowly, the foal stretched her neck forward and touched her. A soft brush of her muzzle against Emma's sleeve. Daniel sat down without realizing it. Claire felt something break inside her, but not in the way she feared. On the screen, Emma leaned forward just a fraction and whispered again, even softer this time. "Come here." Mia didn't move away. She stepped closer, rested her head gently against the little girl's shoulder. The barn fell completely still. No sudden movements, no fear. Just the quiet rhythm of 2 breaths, one small, one trembling finding the same pace. In the kitchen, neither parent spoke, because they understood something all at once without needing it explained. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was recognition. 2 beings who had learned in different ways that the world could turn loud and violent without warning, choosing, for the first time, not to run. And as the rain continued its soft, endless tapping above them, one impossible truth settled into the silence of that room. The girl who could not speak had just been heard. Before silence became the shape of Emma Mercer's life, she had been the kind of child who seemed born with sunlight in her throat. She talked to birds as if they were neighbors. She talked to strangers in grocery lines as if they had been expected. She talked to bugs on the sidewalk, to clouds over parking lots, to the moon through the backseat window. At 2 years old, she had no reason to believe the world was anything but reachable. Everything around her felt alive. Everything deserved an answer. And Emma, with her bright eyes and unstoppable little voice, gave one. Then, one afternoon in the park, the world came down with wings. It happened so fast that even years later, Claire remembered it in broken flashes instead of a full scene. A bench, a juice box, Daniel laughing at something Emma had said. Then, the violent beat of black feathers. A crow dropped out of the sky and hit the child like a nightmare with claws. Its wings thrashed against her head, its feet tangled in her curls. Claire heard herself scream before she understood what she was seeing. Daniel lunged. A man from another bench ran over. The bird fought wildly, all noise and panic and sharp black motion, until finally it tore free and vanished into the trees. But by then, the damage had already been done. Emma was in Claire's arms, shaking so hard her teeth clicked together. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide. Her little body was trying to scream again. Nothing came out. At first, they thought it was shock, then exhaustion, then something that would pass after sleep, or a doctor visit, or one more quiet day at home. But the day after came and went. Then a week, then a month. Emma never went fully numb. That would have been easier to understand. She still laughed sometimes, but only soundlessly. She still cried. She still reached for her mother when frightened, still leaned against her father during cartoons, still watched the world with a deep and aching intelligence that seemed almost too large for her small body. But speech was gone. The experts gave them language for it. Selective mutism, trauma response, nervous system shutdown. Claire thanked them politely and hated every phrase. Not because they were wrong, but because they were clean, neat, controlled. Nothing about this felt neat inside the Mercer house. Silence changed the temperature of everything. It sat at the breakfast table between the cereal bowls. It rode with them to appointments. It waited in the hallway outside therapy rooms painted in cheerful colors that now felt almost cruel. It followed Claire into the grocery store when cashiers smiled at Emma and said, "And how are you today, sweetheart?" It stood behind Daniel when relatives tried too hard to be helpful. "Don't pressure her. Maybe she'll just grow out of it. Have you tried singing? They tried everything. Speech cards, picture boards, puppet games, play therapy, rewards, soft voices, patience, more patience, then the exhausted kind of patience that starts to feel like grief with good manners. Claire bought a notebook and wrote words across the front in blue marker. She placed it on the kitchen counter like an altar no one was supposed to name. Inside, she wrote simple things Emma might want to say. Mom. Dad. Water. Yes. No, I'm scared. I'm okay. At first, she believed the notebook would fill. Then she hoped it would. Then she stopped opening it unless she had to. Daniel handled the silence differently. Claire cried in private. Daniel became practical. He researched specialists at midnight. He compared therapy methods. He drove long distances without complaining. And he fixed things around the house that did not need fixing because there was something unbearable about loving a problem he could not solve. And through it all, Emma kept moving through the world like a child standing behind glass. She did not speak at preschool. She did not speak at church. She did not speak when she fell and scraped her knee on the driveway so badly that blood ran into her sock. Claire had cleaned the wound while Emma sat rigid on the washing machine, tears rolling down her face in silence so complete it terrified her mother more than screaming ever could. Years passed that way. Not empty years, loving years, tender years, but strained almost to the point of breaking. Then came the first crack. It was small enough that, in another family, it might have been missed. Daniel was driving home from one more appointment that had ended with careful optimism and no visible change. Claire sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, and trying not to let Emma see her disappointment. The road curved past a pasture just outside town where two horses stood near a sagging fence, their tails swishing lazily in the late afternoon light. Nothing dramatic happened. No music, no revelation, no grand cinematic sign from heaven. Emma simply turned her head. Fast, her whole body sharpened with attention in a way Claire had not seen in months. Then, from the back seat, came a sound so rough and small that Claire thought for 1 second she had imagined it. Horse. Daniel hit the brake so suddenly the truck rocked. Claire turned around with tears already rising before she could stop them. Emma was still staring through the window, breathing a little faster, as if something inside her had reached forward on instinct before fear could drag it back. That one word changed the direction of everything. Not quickly, not magically, but undeniably. After that, Emma reacted whenever horses appeared on television. She sometimes pointed. Once, watching an old Western with Daniel's father, she whispered, "Big." Another time, passing a ranch road, she pressed her hand to the glass and said nothing at all, but smiled. Dr. Kendra Lowe noticed the pattern before the Mercers fully trusted it. "We may be pushing language too directly," she told them during one session, her tone calm, careful, almost reluctant to let hope get ahead of evidence. "Some children can't move toward people until something else makes them feel safe first." Claire frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Lowe said, "we stop asking Emma to come back the way we expect. We look for the place where her nervous system doesn't feel hunted." Daniel leaned forward. "And you think that's horses?" "I think," Dr. Lowe replied, "that when she sees them, something in her stops, bracing." Claire wanted to believe her. That was the dangerous part. Hope had become dangerous in their house. Every time it rose, it demanded a cost. So when Dr. Lowe mentioned Willow Ridge Rescue, Claire's first response was fear. "You want us to take a traumatized child to a rescue farm full of neglected animals?" "No," Dr. Lowe said gently. "I want you to take a wounded child somewhere pain is understood without explanation." Daniel looked at Claire. Claire looked at the floor. Neither said what both were thinking. What if this was the last thing they had left to try? That thought followed them home, into bed, into the next morning, into the kitchen where the words notebook still sat with its blank pages and patient silence. Claire stood there with one hand on the counter, staring at that notebook as if it had become a verdict. They had done everything the right way. Everything. And still their daughter lived behind a locked door no one could reach. So maybe the next step did not need to feel safe. Maybe it needed to feel true. By the time Daniel called Willow Ridge, neither of them described it as optimism. They described it as a visit. Just a visit. No promises, no pressure, no miracle language. But underneath that careful restraint was something rawer. This was not a casual outing. This was the place people go when polished answers have failed. This was the last quiet road before surrender. And neither parent said it aloud, but both felt the same terrible tender truth as they prepared to take Emma there for the first time. If something in that little girl was still reaching for the world, it was reaching through horses. And somewhere beyond town, beyond the doctor's office and the notebook and the years of swallowed words, a frightened foal was standing in a dark stall, waiting for a child she had never met. Willow Ridge Rescue sat at the edge of town like a place built for things no one else wanted to carry. The gravel road was uneven, scarred by old tires and rainwater. The fences leaned. The barn paint had long since surrendered to weather. Nothing about it looked polished enough to impress anybody. But the place was alive in the stubbornest way. Water buckets full, feed bins labeled, gates repaired more than once. It was not beautiful. It was faithful. Daniel killed the engine and looked back at Emma. She was already staring at the barn. Claire felt her stomach tighten. "We can still leave." Neither of them moved. That was what desperation had become in the Mercer family. Not panic, not drama. Just one hard choice after another, made quietly because they had run out of easier ones. The office door opened before they reached it. A woman in a faded denim jacket stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind her with her hip. She had tired eyes, sun-worn skin, and the posture of someone who had spent years bracing for bad news without letting it slow her down. This was Marla Bennett. "You made it," she said. Her voice wasn't warm, exactly, but it was honest, and by now, honesty meant more to Claire than comfort ever could. Inside, the rescue smelled like hay, grain, damp wood, disinfectant, and animal breath. Life in all its unromantic forms. A one-eyed goat watched them from behind a gate. Somewhere deeper in the barn, a dog barked once and was sharply hushed. The place felt less like a sanctuary and more like a field hospital held together by routine. Marla walked them slowly down the aisle. "That old gelding is Jasper," she said. "Mean to men. Loves peppermints. That donkey's Walter. He holds grudges." Daniel smiled politely. Claire tried. Emma said nothing. She passed the goats, the rabbits, a miniature pony that pushed its nose eagerly through the rail. She barely looked at any of them. She walked in silence, small hand resting against Claire's sleeve, as if she were waiting for something she couldn't name. Marla noticed. "So, Dr. Lowe explained why you're here?" she asked. "She said animals might reach Emma differently," Daniel said. Marla nodded once. "Sometimes they do, but I don't like miracles. They make people careless." Claire looked at her. "You think this is a mistake?" "I think hope makes adults forget danger," Marla replied. "And the filly at the end of this barn is dangerous." They reached the final stall. The air changed there. It was quieter, but not calmer. Quiet in the way rooms get quiet after a slammed door. An extra chain hung on the latch. Fresh boards reinforced the lower half. A simple plate on the front read, "MIA." Marla stopped and turned to them. "This is where I tell you again," she said. "If Emma gets frightened, we leave. If the foal gets agitated, we leave. If either one says no in the only way they know how, we listen." Claire swallowed. "Is she really that bad?" Marla's face hardened, not with anger, but with protection. "She's not bad. She's terrified." Then she added more quietly, And terrified horses can break bones. Claire instinctively drew Emma back half a step. Emma resisted, barely, but enough for Claire to feel it. Marla rested one hand on the stall door. Good bloodline, born into a racing program. People had plans for her before she was old enough to understand fear. Then a storm hit 3 months ago. Thunder, power outage, chaos. After that, she started coming apart. Daniel frowned. Storms don't do all this by themselves. Marla's jaw tightened. No, they don't. She opened the upper half of the stall. At first, Claire couldn't see the filly clearly. Mia stood deep in the corner, half hidden in shadow. One side pressed against the boards as if she wanted the wall to swallow her. She was younger than Claire expected. Smaller, too. That made the sight of her ribs worse. A healing rub mark cut across the bridge of her nose. Her coat had once probably shined. Now it looked dulled by stress and neglect. Emma stopped walking. Not dramatically, not fearfully. She simply stopped. Something in her entire body went still with focus. Marla noticed it at once. That's the first time she's locked in on anything since you got here. Claire lowered her voice. Maybe this is enough for today. But Emma didn't move. She stood at the rail with a kind of solemn attention that made every adult around her feel clumsy. She was not smiling, not pointing, not acting like a child at a petting zoo. She was simply there, looking at the frightened foal as if she recognized something. Marla glanced between them. She can step closer, just not inside. Claire almost objected. Then she heard Dr. Lowe's voice in her mind. No pressure. Let Emma lead. So they moved closer. Emma placed both hands on the top rail.
He told me everything.
Inside the stall, Mia did not come forward. She stayed in the dark corner, head low, every line of her body saying the same thing. Stay back. Claire felt her hope sink so sharply it embarrassed her. Of course this was how it would go. A wounded child and a wounded horse were not going to heal each other because desperate adults needed a story. Then Emma did the one thing none of them expected. She waited. A full minute passed. No reaching, no waving, no coaxing smile. She simply stood there in complete stillness, as if she understood that fear can spook at joy just as easily as it does at threat. Marla stared. She's not trying to grab her. With kids, is that unusual? Daniel asked. Marla let out a breath. Very. Inside the stall, Mia shifted her weight. One ear turned forward, then both. Tiny movement. Massive meaning. Emma leaned in just slightly. And then, from a child who had denied the world her voice for 4 long years, came 3 soft words. Come here. Claire stopped breathing. Marla went rigid. Daniel did not move at all. Mia lifted her head. For one suspended second, the filly seemed caught between 2 instincts, the old one that said survival meant distance, and something quieter that asked her to believe. She took 1 step forward, then another. Not fast, not easy. She moved as if every inch cost her something. Her neck stretched out, her nostrils widened. The whites of her eyes still showed, but there was no explosion in her now, only caution, curiosity, trembling effort. Emma held still. That was the part none of them forgot. She did not behave like a little girl meeting a horse. She behaved like someone approaching grief with respect, with patience, with the strange maturity that pain sometimes gives the very young. Mia reached the front of the stall. Emma lifted one small hand through the gap above the rail. Marla whispered, "Don't." But the warning came too late. Mia lowered her head and pressed her muzzle into Emma's open palm. No violence, no recoil, just contact. Soft, careful, almost disbelieving. Claire covered her mouth. Daniel looked away for half a second, the way men sometimes do when emotion arrives too fast to be hidden with dignity. Marla stared openly. "I've had experienced handlers in this barn," she said quietly. "She wouldn't even look at them." Emma said nothing else. She didn't need to, because Mia stayed there, breathing against her hand, as if the first safe thing she had felt in months had arrived in the form of a silent little girl. And Claire understood then why Dr. Lowe had called this a last resort. Not because it was reckless, because it was honest. No one here was demanding progress. No one was saying, "Speak, smile, trust." They were simply allowing two frightened beings to recognize the same wound in each other. Marla exhaled slowly and kept her eyes on the stall. "And if you want my opinion," she said, "that foal's been waiting for someone who doesn't scare like adults do." Daniel looked at Emma, then at Mia. "What happens now?" Marla finally turned toward them. Her face held no false optimism, only caution, and something rarer, respect. "Now," she said, "you decide whether you're willing to bring home an animal everybody else has already given up on." And before either parent could answer, Mia leaned forward and chose the child again. They did not bring home a miracle. They brought home a secret. That was what Claire Mercer understood 3 days after Mia arrived at their small barn outside town. The first rush of wonder had already begun to settle into routine. The feed buckets, the careful distance, the quiet voices, the rule that nobody moved too fast around the filly. Wonder was still there. Yes, but wonder did not erase damage. It only made people brave enough to face it. And Mia was damaged in ways that did not end at fear. By daylight, the little barn behind the Mercer house looked plain enough. Weathered boards, a rusted latch Daniel kept meaning to replace, a tack hook with nothing hanging from it yet because no one wanted to pretend too soon. But inside that simple space, everything had changed shape around the foal. Emma spent hours there, not touching, not asking, not performing for her parents' hope. She simply sat in the straw near the stall rail with a paperback in her lap or a box of crayons beside her, drawing silent horses with oversized eyes and long, careful legs. Sometimes Mia stayed in the back corner watching. Sometimes she crept closer, one measured step at a time. Sometimes she stood near enough to breathe in Emma's hair, then retreated again as if ashamed of wanting comfort. Claire noticed the first clue on the second morning. It was not dramatic, just a sound. She had stepped into the barn carrying a pan of soaked feed when Daniel jingled his truck keys in his pocket behind her. The noise was small, ordinary, forgettable. Mia reacted as if lightning had struck inside the stall. Her whole body snapped tight. Her head flew up. She stumbled backward so fast her hindquarters slammed the boards. And for one raw second the whites of her eyes flashed with such naked terror that Claire nearly dropped the pan. Daniel froze. "I didn't even—" "I know," Claire whispered. But she was staring at the filly's face, at the way fear had arrived too fast, too deep, too practiced. That was the first clue. Not just that Mia was scared, that she had learned to attach fear to specific sounds, keys, metal, the tiny jolt of a human approaching with purpose. Later that same afternoon, Claire found the second clue. Emma had been sitting outside the stall drawing circles in the dust with a broken red crayon while Mia stood close enough to watch. The scene looked so gentle, so impossible that Claire made the mistake of taking out her phone. She only wanted a few seconds. Not for strangers, for family, for proof that something beautiful had actually happened in this house. She filmed 10 seconds. Emma in profile. Mia stepping closer. The light falling warm across both of them like Grace had decided to enter through the cracks in the boards. Claire sent it to her sister with the message, "You won't believe this." She should have known that was how such things escaped. By evening, her sister had shown a friend. The friend had shown 2 more. Someone recognized Willow Ridge in the backstory Claire added when asked. Someone else remembered that crazy foal from the local rescue page. By nightfall, the clip had found its way onto a town Facebook group where people who rarely agreed on anything suddenly agreed that the footage was astonishing. The silent girl. The dangerous foal. The comments poured in. This made me cry. Is that the Mercer child? I heard that horse couldn't be handled at all. Maybe some animals know. Claire should have felt only pride, or gratitude, or hope. Instead, she felt uneasy, because attention had weight, and wounded things rarely benefited from being seen by too many people too quickly. The third clue arrived the next morning in the shape of a pickup truck. Old model. Dark paint. Mud dried high along the sides. It rolled slowly past the Mercer property just after 9 and did not stop. Claire only noticed it because she was at the sink looking out the window toward the road. 10 minutes later, it came back. This time, it slowed near the mailbox. Did not stop. Did not continue naturally either. Just slowed long enough for the driver to look toward the barn. Claire set the coffee mug down. By the time Daniel came in from stacking hay, the truck was gone. "You know him?" he asked when she described it. Claire shook her head. "No, but he wasn't lost." That evening, Marla drove out from Willow Ridge with 2 extra bales and the serious look she wore when truth was about to become inconvenient. "I need to show you something," she said. They stood in the barn aisle while Emma sat cross-legged near the stall, humming silently to herself the way she sometimes did when deeply focused. Mia remained near her, ears flicking, body loose in a way still new enough to feel fragile. Marla opened a thin manila folder. Inside were copies, auction papers, intake notes, a vet summary. She handed the top page to Daniel. The printed description was blunt. Bay filly. Severe panic response after storm event. Untrainable. Low value transfer. Claire frowned. Low value. "That's what caught my eye too," Marla said. She flipped to the next document, an older breeding sheet half smudged by moisture and handling. Most of the names meant nothing to Claire, but one thing was clear even to her untrained eye. This foal had not been born worthless. Daniel looked up. "You're saying somebody dumped a valuable horse?" "I'm saying somebody wanted her listed as worthless," Marla replied. The distinction landed hard. Claire glanced toward the stall. Emma had not looked up. She was drawing. Mia was watching her hand move across the page as if the crayon itself were some harmless little miracle. "What happened to her?" Claire asked quietly. Marla took a breath. "Officially, the story is that a storm blew through the training barn, the filly panicked, and after that she couldn't be worked. And unofficially?" Marla's jaw hardened. "Storms don't teach a horse to fear keys, or men's boots, or sudden reach. Storms expose things. They don't explain everything." The barn went still around them. Somewhere outside, wind shifted through dry grass. A dog barked far off down the road. The world continued in its ordinary shape while a much darker possibility entered the Mercer family's life and sat down like it belonged there. Abuse. Not proven. Not yet. But close enough to cast a shadow over every gentle thing Mia did. Daniel stared at the papers. Who had her before? Marla hesitated. That was answer enough to make Claire's pulse quicken. "Marla." "A trainer's representative named Cal Harker handled the transfer paperwork," she said. "He has a reputation for being smooth when things are going well and slippery when they're not." "The truck," Claire said. Marla nodded once. "Maybe, maybe not. But that video of Emma and Mia is moving around faster than I'd like. If somebody thought this foal was a loss, and now suddenly people are seeing her as special." She let the rest hang. "Money makes people come back." That truth didn't need speaking aloud. Daniel looked toward his daughter then, and something changed in his face. Until that moment, bringing Mia home had still held the shape of an experiment. A compassionate risk. A temporary act of care. Now it became responsibility. Because if someone had hurt this foal, discarded her, then noticed her value again only after a little girl helped make her visible. They were no longer caring for a frightened animal. They were protecting evidence. Near the stall, Emma finally lifted her head, and her eyes moved from her drawing to Mia, then to her parents, as if she could feel the current in the room changing even if no one explained why. Mia sensed it too. Her ears flicked back. Her body tightened just a fraction. Claire crossed the aisle at once and crouched beside her daughter. "It's okay," she whispered, though she no longer knew whether she was speaking to Emma, to the horse, or to herself. Emma looked at her for a long second. Then, slowly, she held up the drawing in her lap. It was a child's picture. Simple. Crayon lines. A small girl beside a horse. But, unlike the others, this one had something new in it. A fence. And beyond the fence, drawn in dark, jagged strokes, a truck. Claire felt cold move through her. "Did you see it too?" Daniel asked softly. Emma said nothing. She only lowered the page and leaned her shoulder against the stall rail. Mia stepped closer from the inside and rested her nose near Emma's elbow, as if both of them understood in the same silent way that safety was no longer a private thing. It was something that might have to be defended. Marla closed the folder. "I'm not telling you this to scare you," she said. Claire stood. "Then why tell us now?" "Because once people realize a broken thing can still be worth something," Marla said, "they have a habit of coming back to claim it." No one answered. They did not need to. The answer was already in the room, in the papers, in the truck on the road, in the way Mia flinched at sounds too specific to be accidental, in the way Emma, who had spent 4 years trapped behind silence, had somehow found the one creature on earth whose fear matched her own. Daniel looked at Claire. Claire looked at the stall, and in that worn little barn, with the evening light thinning through the boards and the first true shadow of danger settling over all of them, they made the smallest decision of the story, and the one that changed everything. Yeah, they would not send Mia back, not to Willow Ridge, not to paperwork, not to anybody who suddenly remembered her value. What they did not know yet was that the moment they chose to keep her safe, someone else had already chosen to come and take her. The storm arrived just after midnight like it had been holding a grudge. At first it was only wind-low, prowling, restless wind pressing against the siding of the barn and slipping through the smallest cracks in the boards. Then came the rain. Sharp, sudden, hard enough on the tin roof to make the whole structure sound brittle. By the time the first thunder rolled across the sky, the Mercer house was already awake. Claire sat up in bed before the sound had fully landed. Daniel was beside her a second later. Then they heard it. One violent slam from the barn. Not a loose shutter, not a swinging chain. A body hitting wood. Claire's heart dropped. Mia. They were halfway down the hall when the second impact came. Harder this time. Followed by the raw scrape of hooves against planks and a sound no frightened parent ever mistakes once they've heard it. Panic. The barn lights came on in a wash of pale yellow. Rain blew sideways through the open aisle as Daniel yanked the door wide. Inside, Mia was no longer a filly standing carefully beside a child's drawings and quiet rituals. She was terror with legs. She slammed backward into the stall wall, then lunged sideways, striking at shadows that weren't there. Her eyes were white-rimmed. Her breathing came in savage bursts. Every crack of thunder seemed to tear straight through her body and leave her more desperate than before. The stall boards rattled under the force of her fear. Claire stopped dead. "Oh my God!" Daniel grabbed the lead rope hanging by the tack hook, then froze with it in his hand. Because he remembered what Marla had said. Terrified horses can break bones. Another thunderclap hit. Mia exploded again, crashing her shoulder against the wall so hard the whole stall shuddered. Claire reached for her phone with shaking fingers. "Call Marla," Daniel said. But he sounded as if he wasn't speaking to Claire so much as to the room, to the weather, to whatever Mercy might still be listening. Then came a smaller sound. Not from the storm. From the far end of the aisle, Emma was standing barefoot in the barn doorway. Her hair was loose from sleep. Her small face was pale in the yellow light. She wore the same oversized t-shirt she had gone to bed in, and she looked impossibly little against the violence of that night. "Emma!" Claire started toward her at once. "No, sweetheart, stay back." But Emma did not move toward her mother. She moved toward the stall. Daniel stepped in front of her instinctively. "No." Emma stopped. For 1 second, the entire barn held two different kinds of fear at once. Mia's loud, wrecking terror, and the silent, immovable fear of a child who recognized exactly what that terror felt like. Thunder cracked again. Mia screamed and reared halfway, front hooves striking the door. Claire flinched so hard it hurt. Emma did not. She looked at Mia the way she had that first day at Willow Ridge, not like a child fascinated by an animal, but like one wounded creature seeing another at the edge of itself. Daniel lowered the rope. He would never later be able to explain why. Maybe because Emma's face held no recklessness, no childish impulse, no fantasy that love made things safe. What she carried in that moment was older than bravery. Recognition. Slowly, Daniel stepped aside. Claire turned on him. "What are you doing?" But even as she said it, she knew. Nothing else was reaching Mia. Not the light, not the voices, not the distance, not the rope. Emma took 1 step forward, then another. She did not enter the stall. She stopped at the rail, close enough to be dangerous, far enough to be denied if Mia struck. Rain hammered the roof. Wind hissed through the cracks. Thunder rolled again, and Mia drove herself backward into the corner so hard Claire thought she might break her own neck. Then Emma lifted both hands and rested her forehead against the top rail. No words, no dramatic plea. Just stillness. The barn was full of sound, but the child gave none back. That was what changed the air. Not magic, not command. Absence. Emma did not try to overpower Mia's fear. She did not speak over it. She did not ask the horse to calm down for the sake of adult relief. She simply stood there and offered the one thing nobody else in that barn knew how to give. A nervous system that did not demand anything. Another thunderclap broke overhead. Mia jerked violently, then stopped. Not fully, not safely, but enough for the break in rhythm to show. Her head turned. Her ears flicked forward. She saw Emma. Really saw her. Emma stayed where she was, forehead pressed to the wood, one hand slipping slowly through the gap above the rail. Claire could not breathe. Daniel stood so still he looked nailed to the floor. Mia took 1 step, then another, still trembling, still ready to flee. But the chaos had changed direction. It was no longer crashing outward blindly. It was being pulled, inch by inch, toward something quieter. Rain drummed overhead. Emma did not speak. She didn't have to. When Mia reached the front of the stall, she lowered her head so abruptly it looked like surrender. Her muzzle struck the rail once, then slid past it until it pressed against Emma's shoulder. The child did not flinch. She turned her face slightly and rested her forehead against the filly's neck. Small body, trembling horse, thunder all around them, and somehow, impossibly, their breathing began to match. Claire covered her mouth with both hands, because this was not the clean kind of healing people like to post online with uplifting music behind it. And this was ugly weather and old fear and two broken creatures finding the same rhythm in the dark. Mia shuddered once, then again, but she did not slam the walls anymore, did not strike, did not try to disappear through wood and shadow. She stood there, pressed against the child as if Emma's silence had become a shelter she could finally enter. Daniel let the rope fall from his hand. Claire's phone was still in her pocket. She had forgotten to call anyone. The storm did not end. Not yet. But inside that stall, its power changed. It was no longer the only force in the room. Then, just as the barn settled into that fragile stillness, a new light cut across the aisle. Headlights. Bright. Sweeping. sudden. They flashed through the cracks in the boards and dragged long white bars across the walls. An engine rumbled outside, slow and deliberate, then stopped just beyond the barn. Daniel turned toward the door. Claire felt the blood leave her face, and because there is a particular kind of dread that comes when peace has barely arrived and danger chooses that exact moment to step closer. Emma stayed where she was. Mia's head lifted slightly from her shoulder, ears pricked toward the sound. Outside, a truck door opened. And in the silence after the storm's next distant roll, boots hit wet gravel. By morning, the storm had passed, but the threat had not. The sky over the Mercer property was a washed-out gray, the kind that made everything look colder than it really was. Rainwater dripped from the barn roof in slow, steady taps. Mud clung to the driveway. The wind had died, but it had left something behind, a feeling, as if the night had opened a door and forgotten to close it. Claire had barely slept. Neither had Daniel. Emma, somehow, had. After the truck lights swept the barn and the footsteps circled once outside, no one came in. No knock, no call. Just an engine idling for a few seconds too long, then fading back down the road. It was worse that way. A direct threat could have been answered. This felt like being measured. Inside the barn, Mia had stayed close to Emma until dawn, not touching her the whole time, not trusting enough for that, but near in the way frightened creatures stay near the only thing that makes the world feel survivable. Emma had eventually fallen asleep on a folded blanket in the aisle, one hand still resting against the stall rail, and Mia had stood on the other side of it, head low, eyes half-lidded, as if guarding the child who had guarded her. Now, as pale morning light slipped through the boards, the farm looked ordinary again. That was the insult of it. Danger rarely arrived wearing horns. Most of the time it stood in daylight with a calm face and clean boots. The black pickup rolled into the driveway just after 10. Claire saw it from the kitchen window and felt her stomach turn to stone. Daniel. He came in from the back porch, wiping his hands on a rag, and followed her stare. Neither of them spoke for a full second. The truck stopped near the barn. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out slowly, and like he had every right in the world to take his time. Cal Harker looked exactly like the kind of man small towns trusted too easily. Well-built, mid-40s, clean jeans, pressed jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, not flashy, not rough enough to seem dangerous at first glance, the kind of man who knew how to speak in reasonable tones while doing unreasonable things. He took a lead rope from the passenger seat and shut the door with a smooth, casual swing. Claire's voice came out flat. No. Emma was already in the barn. That was what made Daniel move first. By the time Cal reached the gate, Daniel was there to meet him, shoulders squared, body angled in a way that was not yet aggressive but had already stopped being welcoming. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. Cal smiled. It was the kind of smile that tried to settle itself into the room before the rest of him did. "Name's Cal Harker," he said. "I'm here for the filly." Inside the barn, Mia heard his voice. Claire saw the reaction before she even crossed the threshold. The young horse, who had eaten half a bucket of soaked feed an hour earlier and stood almost peacefully while Emma sat reading from a picture book, went rigid so fast it looked like pain. Her head shot up, her ears pinned, her nostrils flared. One step backward, then another. Emma stopped reading. She looked from Mia to the aisle, and though she did not yet understand every adult word in that moment, she understood enough. This man was not safety. Daniel did not move from the gate. "You're not taking anything?" Cal kept smiling. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. There are men who shout when they want control. They are easy to recognize. Then there are men like Cal men who lower their voices because they know calm can feel more powerful than anger. The filly was mishandled in transfer after the storm," he said. That's being corrected. I've got paperwork." Claire stepped beside Daniel. Then show it to our lawyer, she said. That made him glance at her properly for the first time, not with interest, with assessment. He had expected anxious kindness, rural politeness, maybe confusion. Instead, he found a mother who had spent 4 years watching her child suffer and no longer had any patience left for men who arrived smiling at Barnes. Cal's expression barely changed. "I'm trying to do this the easy way," he said. Behind them, Emma had risen to her feet. She did not run to her mother. She did not hide. She moved closer to Mia's stall instead, instinctively placing herself nearer to the trembling horse. And Mia, despite her fear, despite the visible shock racing through her body, stepped toward the girl. Not toward the adults, toward Emma. Cal saw that. Claire watched the moment land in his face. Not wonder, not tenderness, not even surprise. Calculation. There it was, the thing Marla had warned them about. A broken animal was worthless. A broken animal that could now be filmed, posted, talked about, reclaimed, displayed. That was something else entirely. "You put that clip online," Cal said, looking at Claire. It was not a question. Claire's silence was answer enough. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You people have no idea what you're holding." Daniel's voice hardened. "I think we know enough." Cal took one step forward. Daniel matched it. Not loud, not theatrical, just enough to make the point clear. "You do not pass through here." For a moment, all that could be heard was water dripping from the roof edge and Mia's uneven breathing inside the stall. Then another truck pulled in fast. Marla. She got out before the engine fully died, a folder in one hand and her phone in the other. "Don't do this, Cal," she called as she crossed the mud. "Not on private property. Not with a foster under review." Cal turned toward her, and for the first time the smile thinned. "Review?" he said. "That animal belongs to the program." Marla stopped at Daniel's shoulder. "Then the program can explain the intake discrepancies, the valuation gap, and why the horse flinches at keys like she learned it from experience." Silence. The kind that reveals more than denial ever could. Cal's jaw tightened, just once. But it was enough. Claire saw Emma look up at him then, not with fear exactly, but with the grave stillness she had the first day at Willow Ridge. Mia stood pressed near the stall front now, body shaking, eyes locked on the man outside. Dr. Lowe's voice crackled through Marla's phone speaker. "Emma should not be exposed to confrontation," she said. Claire almost laughed at the cruelty of that sentence, as if confrontation had asked permission before arriving at her house. Cal shifted the rope in his hand. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." "No," Daniel said. "You did that when you showed up here." There it was again, that brief fracture in Cal's controlled expression. The charm slipping just enough for the thread underneath to show its teeth. His voice dropped lower. "You don't know what you're holding. Let it go before you get dragged." The words hung in the air like something oily, not shouted, which made them worse. Claire felt anger rise so clean and fierce inside her that it erased fear for one glorious second. "She's not going anywhere with you," she said. Cal looked at her, then at Daniel, then past them, at Emma. That was his mistake, because Emma did not step back. She reached one hand through the stall rail and Mia pressed against it immediately, urgently, like a witness answering a question no one else could hear. Marla lifted the folder. "You want to push this? Fine. We push it through inspection, through welfare review, through every office that still knows the difference between ownership and cruelty." For the first time, Cal seemed to understand that this was no longer about a frightened foal in a forgotten stall. Too many people had seen her. Too many people had started asking the wrong questions. He took a slow breath, put the lead rope back over his shoulder. Then he smiled again. But this time, nobody in that barn could have mistaken it for anything human. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Marla replied. "It isn't." Cal turned, got back in the truck, and drove away without another word. Mud spat from the tires, the engine noise faded down the road. Then the property was quiet again, but not peaceful, because some men leave without surrendering. Inside the barn, Daniel let out a breath he had been holding too long. Claire went straight to Emma, kneeling in the straw, touching her shoulders, her hair, her face, as if she needed to confirm with her hands that her daughter was still here. Emma looked past her mother at Mia, and the filly was still trembling, still shaken, but she had not retreated to the back corner. She had stayed at the front of the stall. She had stayed with Emma. And that was when Claire understood the full shape of what had changed. This was no longer a quiet little healing story hidden in a family barn. This was a fight, not just for a horse, for the right of two frightened souls to remain where they had finally begun to feel safe. And somewhere down the road, inside a black pickup disappearing into the gray light, a man who had once discarded fear as worthless was already deciding how hard he wanted to come back for it. The fight did not begin in a courtroom. It began in whispers. By the next afternoon, the town had already split itself into pieces the way small towns always do when truth arrives before people are ready for it. At the feed store, men who had never set foot in the Mercer barn had opinions about ownership. At the diner, women lowered their voices over coffee and said things like, "I'm sure there are two sides." Online, the video of Emma and Mia kept spreading, shared now with outrage, sympathy, doubt, and the ugly fascination people reserve for pain once it becomes public. Claire hated all of it, because none of those people had seen Mia slam herself into a wall in terror. None of them had watched Emma spend 4 years trapped behind silence. And none of them understood that this was no longer about a horse's market value or a foster agreement or which man had filed which piece of paper. It was about what fear does when powerful people decide it belongs to them. Marla moved fast. Faster than Claire expected. She filed for a welfare review, pushed the intake discrepancies forward, and called in every favor she had left. A county livestock inspector agreed to attend a formal hearing with the local rescue board. Dr. Lowe sent a written statement about Emma's condition and the measurable changes since Mia entered the family's life. Daniel gathered every document they had, camera stills, dates, messages, copies of the original transfer papers. He did it late at night at the kitchen table, jaw tight, glasses slipping down his nose, looking less like a father and more like a man building a fence against something determined to climb over. The morning of the hearing, the sky was clear. That almost made Claire angry. The world looked too normal for a day that mattered this much. Emma sat in the back seat on the drive into town, a book in her lap and one of her drawings folded carefully inside it. Mia had been left safely at Willow Ridge for the afternoon under Marla's staff supervision, away from the noise and the strangers and the risk that Cal might try something reckless in public. Claire turned around before they parked. "You don't have to speak," she told her daughter softly. "You understand that, right?" Emma looked at her, then nodded. The hearing was held in a plain county meeting room with bad coffee, metal chairs, and fluorescent lights that made everybody look a little tired and a little guilty. Cal Harker arrived in a pressed shirt with a folder under one arm and the same calm expression he wore like a tailored jacket. He looked exactly like the kind of man institutions tend to believe. For a while it seemed they might. He spoke smoothly, called the transfer unfortunate, called the video misleading, called the Mercers emotional, said the filly had value, training potential, and ownership history that made this all very simple. But truth has a weakness for clean stories. It keeps leaving dirt on them. The inspector asked about the auction valuation gap. Marla produced the intake notes. Daniel described the truck by the barn, the nighttime visit, the attempt to remove the horse in person. Dr. Lowe's statement was read aloud. Emma had shown her most significant verbal progress in 4 years only after bonding with Mia. A bond built not on performance, but on mutual regulation and trust. Then came the part Cal had not prepared for. The inspector asked one final question. If the filly was only a transfer issue, he said, why did she display conditioned fear responses tied to handling cues? Conditioned fear. The room seemed to sharpen around those two words. Cal's answer came a second too late. That pause cost him more than any speech could have. Claire felt it. And Daniel did, too. Even the rescue board members shifted in their seats, sensing the crack in the story. Then Emma stood up. No one had asked her to. No one had planned it. Claire's heart stopped. The room went still in that awkward, half-concerned way adults get when a child enters the center of a moment they thought belonged to them. Emma looked very small under the fluorescent lights, smaller than she ever had in the barn, but her face held that same grave calm Mia had trusted from the beginning. She looked first at her mother, then at the inspector, then, finally, at Cal Harker. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but nobody missed a word. She was scared. The room froze. Claire felt tears burn instantly. Emma swallowed, steadied herself, and said the rest. And she still came to me. That was all. Not a speech, not a performance, not a miracle poured into language for the comfort of adults. Just the truth. And a whole room of grown people went silent because a 6-year-old girl had explained courage more clearly than any of them ever had. Cal looked away first. That mattered. The board ruled that Mia would remain protected under rescue supervision pending full review, with the Mercers approved as her foster family and Cal's claim flagged for investigation. It was not the end of every legal question, but it was enough. Enough to keep Mia safe. Enough to tell the town which version of the story had finally started to win. Weeks later, the proof of that victory did not look dramatic. It looked ordinary. Emma answering her teacher in class. Emma laughing at recess without shutting down afterward. Emma speaking into the phone one evening when Claire's sister called, so casually that Claire had to sit down after hearing it. And every night before bed, Emma still went to the barn with a book in her hands. She sat in the straw. Mia stood close, no longer hiding from the light, no longer folding herself into corners. Emma read aloud in her small, steady voice while the filly listened with ears tipped forward, as if the sound itself had become a place to rest. That was the real miracle. Not sudden healing, not public victory, consistency, the slow, stubborn return of trust. Because in the end, Emma did not find her voice because the world demanded it back. She found it beside a frightened horse who never demanded anything at all. And Mia did not heal because people finally saw her value. She healed because one silent child looked at her terror and did not turn away.